this lesson we're going to be looking at double and the half angle identities. They're derived by substituting theta for alpha and beta in the sum identities. Double angle identity says that sine of 2 times an angle equals 2 times sine of the angle cosine of the angle. Cosine of 2 times an angle is equal to cosine squared minus sine squared. It's also equal to 2 times cosine squared minus 1. Also equal to 1 minus 2 times sine squared. And the tangent of 2 times an angle equals 2 times tangent of that angle divided by 1 minus tangent squared of that angle. Half angle formulas for sine of half of an angle, that is equal to plus or minus, depending on which quadrant the angle is in, the square root of 1 minus cosine alpha over 2, where alpha is the angle. Cosine of half an angle alpha is equal to plus or minus, again, according to which quadrant the angle is in, the square root of 1 plus cosine of the angle divided by 2. And then tangent of half an angle is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of the angle over 1 plus cosine of the angle. All of that times cosine of the angle. So if we're trying to find sine of 337.5 degrees, I know that 337.5 is the same thing as 675 divided by 2. So we can use the half angle formula. This is the same thing as sine of half of 675. So that would mean alpha is 675. And for the angle, 675 degree angle, sine is going to be negative, because that would be in the fourth quadrant. And sine is always negative in that fourth quadrant. And plug in 675 for alpha. Cosine of 675 is the same thing as cosine of 315. We just subtracted 360 from the 675 to get 315. And cosine of 315 is the square root of 2 over 2. All right, and that is the same thing as the square root of 1 minus the square root of 2 over 2 divided by the square root of 2. So to rationalize the denominator, we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by root 2 over root 2, giving us negative square root of 2 minus root 2, all of that over 2. For this one, we want to find out what cosine of half of theta would be. So we're going to use the cosine half angle identity. And so we have the square root of 1 plus what cosine theta equals, which is negative 2/3, all of that over 2. So 1 plus negative 2/3 is 1/3. And 1/3 divided by 2 is just 1/6. When we rationalize the denominator, we'll get root 6 over 6. Or negative root 6 over 6, because cosine is going to be negative in that quadrant. Cosine, where it's given that cosine is negative, that cosine of theta equals negative 2/3. So half of that is still going to be negative. All right, for this one, we need to find out what goes on that, what the statement is for that second step and the fourth step. So just follow the reason from the previous step. The reason from the first line is replace sine 2x with 2 sine cosine. So that's all we did, was replace the sine 2x with 2 sine cosine. And then to get from that third line to the fourth line, we're going to cancel the common factors in the statement for that third line. So we can cancel one of the signs in the numerator with the sign in the denominator, and the 2's will also cancel, resulting in sine over cosine. Another half angle problem, this time cosine. So we can rewrite 22.5 as 45 over 2. So we'll use, we determine that alpha is 45, and then we'll just use that cosine half angle identity. Plug in 45 for alpha, simplify, rationalize the denominator, and we get the square root of 2 plus root 2, all of that divided by 2. All right, sine of half of the angle, given that tangent of the angle is equal to negative 12 over 5. First thing we need to do is use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of the hypotenuse. Since tangent is opposite over adjacent, it tells us the opposite side of that right triangle is 12 and the adjacent side is 5. So we're going to square both of those, add them up, and then take the square root of that value to get the hypotenuse of that right triangle. So we determine that the hypotenuse is actually going to be 13. And since sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So cosine of theta, which is what we need to plug in to that half angle formula, is 5 over 13. Once I plug in cosine of theta, which is 5 over 13, into that half angle formula, we get the square root of 8 over 13 divided by 2, which is the same thing as the square root of 4 over 13. Rationalize the denominator, and we get 2 root 13 over 13. And negative, because we had a negative value for tangent of the angle measure. And then lastly, second statement we would get by replacing tangent x with sine over cosine. Sine over cosine divided by 2 sine squared is just sine over 2 sine squared cosine. And then to get that statement in the fourth line, we're going to create a common factor in that third statement. All right, we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by cosine. That will yield cosine x over 2 cosine squared sine squared, or sine cosine squared.